and do it. Can you see that all right? Yep. Okay, good. Well, welcome everyone to this is the first one of a series. So this is the teaming transformation series that goes with my book coming out soon. And this one is going to be on evolutionary design. So it's kind of setting the scene for the whole thing. So let's get started. Oh, there we go. Got a little delay. Okay. So I think probably most of you know me in one way or another, but I'm just going to tell you that I'm an evolutionary biologist by training, and I got my start actually working with baboons in Ethiopia. So I was a primatologist, but also a genetic researcher. So I would look at these animals and track their behavior, but see how that related to their genetic patterns of speciation and populations. So basically their evolutionary patterns. So how does evolution really happen in animals like us? Because they're not so different from us. I mean, this is the cradle of humanity. This is in the Rift Valley in Ethiopia, which is, you know, the cradle of our own evolution. So a lot of these patterns are the same, and it's the same time in the Pleistocene. And it gave us a lot of windows onto the way that speciation happens. And now this is being used for to track modeling in between Neanderthals and humans and other early human questions. So that was in '99, and then all kinds of things happened. So, you know what? But the thing is that life finds a way, right? You know, like, all living things have survived for 3.8 billion years, right? So we have the answers in our bones, and, you know, adaptability and regeneration are in our DNA. So what I like to do is take people through evolutionary processes and structures and apply them to our own lives and see if we can increase the adaptability and regeneration that we already have. So here's a good question, you know, what makes us different from other animals? And, you know, to me is like, well, we are animals. It's not so different at all. But I'm going to open it up for a sec and let you express your opinions on that. So does anybody want to offer anything, what they think that makes humans different? And you can just speak freely. Yes, Ken.
I have a little bit of exposure to a biologist from Chile by the name of Humberto Maturana, and he talks about humans, that many animals have language. So wolves can, for example, can coordinate taking down an elk, but they can't coordinate their coordination. So they can't say, oh, that was great, let's come back tomorrow at 4 o'clock, do the same thing. So one of the things I think makes humans different is that we can coordinate our coordinations over time, which is something that other animals seem to lack. We don't know what whales are doing yet, but you know.
So other level of communication from most animals, maybe not the whales. Anything else? Yeah, Allison.
I think even maybe taking a step back from what Ken said, it's our ability to create, to do something different than what we've always done.
Creative. Okay, do we want one more? Oh yeah, Randy.
Foresight.
What's that?
Foresight.
Foresight, planning. Okay, that's a good one. Yeah. Okay. So I like all those answers, and you know, we are animals, and nothing makes sense except in light of that fact. You know, and yet, you know, I did this Google on STEM logos. Allison saw this, and you know, what's missing in these pictures?
No animals.
There's no animals. There's no living things at all. Not even plants.
Look how many things are mechanical.
Yes. And even if you add art to this, steam, you still get no living things. So how are we supposed to consciously evolve if we don't even teach this? You know, so what I see is that leaders are living systems illiterate. and the structures and processes that we live and work in are contrary to our own human potential as animals. So that's what I'm mainly talking about. So, but what if our work created conditions conducive to life? What if we were like the other animals, and why not? You know, we've evolved on this planet just as they have, and so we have the answers within us. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, is growing your unique capacity for affecting change the same way that life always has. So we're going to do a wake-up call, and I'm going to start with this. This guy is a hacker, and so I'm going to put you in breakout rooms, and we're gonna I'm going to ask you. So this is, you know, we're plagued by hackers, and particularly a lot of them are coming from the Ukraine. But I have a client I just started working with, and he is in cybersecurity. So he's telling me about this problem of hackers. And so I'm going to put you in breakout groups and to talk about what kind of solutions could you guys come up with against hackers. So we're just going to do that for 5 minutes, and it's kind of an icebreaker too. Introduce yourselves, and then we'll come back and popcorn that. Okay, Chris, do you want to put them in breakout groups?
I'm on it. Hang on one second.
Okay. How long do you want to give everybody?
This 5 minutes.
Okay. 5 minutes. All right. You will all be whisked away.
Okay. Enjoy.
See you soon.
I did want to say, I forgot to mention that everything you say here is confidential. It's a safe space. You're welcome to share real stories, speak freely, and the recording is only for participants, and we do not record the breakout rooms. So you can speak freely. And yeah, and we'll do a Q&A at the end, and I will give you time to ask questions throughout. So I just want to make sure I said that. And is everybody okay with me recording?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So what came out of that? Any thoughts?
Well, I was in with Randy, and for some reason my video ceased working when I got into the breakout room. But what I did, the slash stayed through the video, so I could only see him. He couldn't see me. But we talked about 3 different strategies. One was just don't go online, so don't play the game. 2 is change the rules of the game. How can we? Well, actually, 2 is leave it as status quo and continue to fight hackers. Or 3 is change the rules of the game. Convert hacking from a parasitic activity to a symbiotic activity. Partner with them and figure out, hey, you guys have some knowledge that would be really useful for us in building a stronger system, so come and work with us.
Okay. Well, you're obviously a regenerative thinker. Does anybody else have any?
We spoke of the perspective of acknowledging them as predators and acknowledging that predators have a function within nature as well, but have the opportunity to invite them into hacking into nature's intellectual property.
Oh, I love it. And that's Creative Commons. Wonderful. Okay. So you guys are really advanced because you skipped my next one, but let's see. I'm just going to say, so now having done that, what value adding role might you imagine for this hacker? And, you know, Ken, you were talking about that, and Harry, you know, you guys jump right to that of symbiosis. How can we, you know, recast their role? And also, you know, that their role as a predator has, you know, a function. It has something to contribute. So focusing on that role they play changes the conversation, and it changes the nature of the solutions that you think about, right? So so that role is important. And so that brings us into what we're going to be talking about, which is that life doesn't solve problems. You know, when we changed it from a problem to asking about the potential, what potential role could this hacker play? It does change the nature of the question. And it turns out that my friend that runs this cybersecurity company is doing exactly that. So he's been researching the hackers, and it turns out they're mostly, they have families in Ukraine. And so he's been, talking to them about what would it take, why do they do that work that they do, how could they shift? And so he's actually hired them to work for him. So life does not solve problems. It just goes to the next open door. And a lot of times that has to do with role. So one of the questions I get a lot is, isn't the lion a problem for the gazelle? But if you think about it, if you zoom out further, they're a system, right? If you were to hand the gazelle on a steaming platter to the lion, it would get fat and lazy. And if you were to keep the gazelle safe by putting it in a cage, it would get fat and lazy too. And so the health of the system declines, but they keep each other healthy, and they also select one another so that they're actually intrinsic to their own transformation. The system as a whole is optimizing, and these roles are critical. So going back to our question of what makes us different, we're 98% chimpanzee, and chimpanzees are, clever, they're empathic, and they're also very political. They're very concerned with dominance, and they basically take what they want. So we're a little different. And I would say that we are super organisms like ants and honeybees. So we're not just like a chimpanzee is really out for themselves. Yes, they live in a community. Yes, they care about each other. But at the end of the day, it's their own reproductive fitness. Nobody's taking care of someone else's babies the way that we do. And for humans, it's 50% of our childcare on average globally is done by someone that's not a relative. And so that's fundamentally different from other species. Elephants and dolphins and toothed whales, they have the same kind of pattern where they have like menopausal grandmothers, and they have, non-relatives and non-reproductives caring for each other's children. And that is really the definition of a superorganism. If it takes a village. So that's one thing. But then, like you were saying when we were talking earlier, it's the conscious evolution that we can plan, and we can think about how things might be different. We can imagine other scenarios. And we're also really good naturalists, pattern mind naturalists, and all animals are. All animals are used to looking for patterns and in their habitat, but we share them, and we have that knowledge is intergenerational for us. So we rely on that from generation to generation in this expanded memory, and that's our culture. So that's this shared body of knowledge and practice that maintains and directs what we do. So we're conscious and collective cultivators of life's generous potential. So I like to think that is human nature and what we're striving for. But one of the questions that I get a lot is that if we are nature, why do we need to copy other creatures? And you hear people talk about, well, we're a young species. It's true that our way of life is quite young, but we're just as old as every other species, right? There's, one spark of life that we know of. And all of us are related. But what differs for us is that we rely on that culture to maintain and direct our conscious evolution. And a lot of that is eroded for us. We've just lost it. So conscious evolution is a biocultural practice. It is intrinsic to our culture, but it's also binds us to the land and the creatures that we depend on and interact with. So if we can align with these deep patterns of life, we can resume our unique and irreplaceable role as cultivators of life's generous potential. So that's what we're trying to do. And I think that we have to be the navigators of our own futures. We have to consciously evolve this collective future. The pattern mind, what we know about the living world is nature doesn't solve problems. It changes the relationships among things, and that changes the pattern. So we change the relationships, we change the pattern, and that changes the future. And that's what humans are really good at. So trying to get conscious about our evolution, how does nature adapt to change? So we know, there's diverse variants in a population, and some are better than others at dealing with whatever constraints are in the environment. So natural selection, right? So over time, this population shifts. And so we've got a lot of different variations in there, and it shifts one way or the other. And it's because there's many variants, it's like a buffer, a reservoir of possibility for the future. So organisms are constrained by their nature and the diversity of opportunities available to them. And so what do they do about it? They make trade-offs. So, like a bird, it's got to be light and strong. So it has developed patterns to their bones that reduce weight and increase strength. And then other animals partner with other organisms. So a plant can't go and get its nutrients from somewhere. So it has to partner with other organisms. So, pollinators, dispersers, they're all helping each other. It's an ecosystem, and they all depend on one another to do that. They hone their roles and they exchange. And so they become more unique and interdependent. And that's what we see. So, and occasionally life stumbles into blue oceans of possibility, whole new possibilities. So you can imagine, I like to imagine that you are here. So here's, you're diversifying all these possibilities, but one of these possibilities will make it into the future. So why not you, right? So that's what we're doing with your teaming transformation. It's trying to figure out what it is that would get you into this future and open this potential. Expand what's possible. So let's get into your teaming transformation now. And we're going to do journaling and breakout groups on this. And then we'll put this into evolutionary design for you. So what field or system are you working to change or improve? So let's go into breakout groups and you can discuss that. I'll leave this up. Does that sound all right, Chris? And how long should we give them for that? 10 minutes?
I assume most of you guys have a pretty clear line on that. So maybe 5 minutes.
Okay. 5 minutes.
All right.
Bye.
All right. Off you go.
All right. And let's hear from each of you. So what field system are you working to change or improve? Who wants to get started? What about you, Allison? I have an inkling of that.
I struggle to come up with a way to describe it. I would say the way we understand human potential is what I'm working to change.
Okay. And how do you do that? What's your approach?
By working with children and young adults to show them what their potential really is and to connect them with who they are.
Okay. So would you say that is dealing with the way they think?
Yeah, perspectives and recognizing behavioral patterns as what's true and what's maybe something somebody told them to do instead.
So like assumptions. So maybe education is the field.
So I hesitated to say education just because it's more like education feels like information, and this is more like wisdom.
Learning to learn.
Yeah.
Okay. Learning to learn. Okay. I like that. Harry, what about you?
The first thought that came to mind was the fact that we're on the Zoom call, so I must have been working on a system change for me to be here. Given the shift of where I came from, to be aware of, for me to be here now, and to continue along that path of the systemic change. And I thought, when you had field/system, I thought that isn't system include the field? It's recognizing that the systemic change is the overall challenge.
So working on systems change. Yeah.
Well, Harry, one of the things that I would toss in there is there a particular, because that's very broad, that's like
Yeah.
any system. And so I think, do you have a particular focus?
So
Like, I would say like a field would be sort of within a given system. It's the sort of boundaries of a particular.
right. So I came from the realm of design and architecture.
Okay.
And so the architectural perspective that I came from does not critically apply to the shift that I'm in the middle of.
Hmm.
So I had to decouple from that in order to be open enough to recognize the biological systems that would have the impact on what future, what architecture would become like.
Mm-hmm. So still evolving the field of architecture, but you see it as becoming something so different that it has to be reinvented.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that applies also to the principles of business associated with how architecture is built too. So business, as usual, does not comply with the shift that I'm experiencing.
Mm-hmm. And when you talk about architecture, are you thinking about buildings, but that people live in or work in, or all of that?
It's just the total question about how do we relate to the planet and when we decide to build on it, and how
I see.
does that even begin to come about?
Okay, so even the field of building,
Yes.
field of what we live and work and build in. Okay, all right. David, nice to meet you. Thank you for joining us. You are on mute, but I would love to hear what your field of work is endeavoring to change.
So we've spent a decade working on scale with social entrepreneurs. And essentially what we found was that each one of them was living in some sort of system or field. And in almost every case, they'd been forced to adopt the rules of the game that were in place in that world. And that meant that there were limits. You know, generally the people who've succeeded in some scaling have a very good knowledge of specific major things that need to happen that aren't happening. And we thought helping them build more powerful networks would enable them to accomplish that. And that didn't turn out to be the case. So the pandemic caused a kind of halt and look-see on that. And now we're really trying to figure out ways to make the networks people have built more powerful and more knowable and more able to connect with other networks or even reassemble networks to accomplish some of these tasks that don't ever get done in the current system.
That's interesting. That's I work with Cisco, and that's kind of the work that we do. They're kind of coupling that to the infrastructure. So
yeah, Cisco spoke at the Bloomberg conference that I was at in New York last Wednesday, first in-person conference they've had since the pandemic. And they were struggling themselves with how their systems work. They a week ago, they opened up all their offices and invited all their employees to come back, and nobody showed up.
Voted with their feet. Interesting.
So that's an example of a system that theoretically knows lots of things it would like to be doing, or at least management does.
Yeah.
But they've now been forced to accept a new set of rules. They never would have done it on their own, but now they've gotten stuck with it. The Times called it the 50 million person experiment.
The company got managed up. I like that. So
David,
would you say, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, so would you say you're seeking to sort of evolve the field of entrepreneurial networking?
I mean, there's lots of people working on the entrepreneurial side. In my view, we're actually overinvested in the entrepreneurial side, because when you come up against the constraints, the natural thing to do is migrate to the most visible impactor. So if you're in kind of business and scaling, entrepreneurship becomes the most visible thing that everybody migrates to. If you're in the nonprofit world, advocacy becomes the most visible thing that everybody migrates to. And it's the easiest thing to migrate to. So I would say we're working on the other end of the spectrum.
More of just evolving networking.
Well,
because I think about, when I think about growth, especially when it pertains to business or anything, you've got to have a system, you got to have a purpose that you're trying to work on. You have to have something that is ready to grow, which means it has a stable foundation. You've got these different structures that become networked to perform anything greater than each one of them can on their own. So they create connections, and that's what creates a system that can perform higher order functioning. Like, that's the whole purpose of the way I see networking, and a sort of process of growth. It has to happen at a structure, systems, processes level.
Yeah, that's the theory, but the theory doesn't work.
What doesn't work about it?
That's kind of the essence of what we're saying. Your ability to see the network is a function of your definition of your tasks, experience, skills, organization, so on. You think you have much more visibility of the network than you do. Sure. You only are seeing a tiny, 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 tiny portion of the network. And I'm even talking about the network you think is yours, the one you think you built. You only see a tiny, tiny, tiny portion of it. So the moment anything changes that causes the frame and the goal and the resources to change, you create this discontinuity where you want to keep telling yourself you're seeing the network, and you're not. And you won't admit that. You do not want to admit that under any circumstances. So the essence of using your network from that point on becomes fraught with failure and absolutely limited in huge ways, because at the very basis of what you're trying to do, you've already been unable to admit what you don't see. What you don't see is the bulk of the iceberg.
I think the next part of the exercises are going to be fun. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I don't want to jump in. I'm trying to help everybody get a little bit more fine-tuned with their answers, because otherwise it gets very abstract and it's just kind of out in the ether.
Mine don't fine-tune very well. Just a very quick example. Just a very, very quick example. About 100 countries have pension funds. Poor countries, developing countries, emerging economies, in addition to the global north. Virtually none of those pension funds can invest in their own country because they're required to do AAA, and nothing in their country is AAA. And so you have Nigeria and Kenya, and the list goes on, who have pension fund money that is invested in global north bonds.
Wow.
Totally ridiculous.
Yeah.
Totally inhibited from accomplish all the things that they want to accomplish.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, how could you build a set of networks that you could actually see that could change that?
Right. So it's really a network science is really kind of where you're at.
Yeah, it's a different view of network science than most people take.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Oh, and let me introduce you all to Chris. So Chris I work, intimately with Chris, and we do, he works with Regenesis Institute. So regenerative development work and strategy. And so he helps me with all this. So he's going to be kind of digging a little deeper on a lot of your answers. All right. So Randy, how about you?
Okay. Approximately, it would be the field of architecture, sort of along the lines of what Harry was talking about. But what I find is that that in itself is a bit mercurial, right? Is it buildings? No, it's not buildings, actually. People think that architects design buildings, and yes, we do, but there's much more to it than that. And that is my area of interest. It has more to do with culture.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Randy, do you know my colleague Bill Reed?
I have met him. I've heard him speak a number of times. I don't know if he would remember me. He might.
He has a fantastic memory. He probably does.
And some of the other folks from the Regenesis Institute, familiar with, is it Sammy Haggard?
Oh, Ben Haggard.
Ben yep. Haggard. Sorry, I'm probably mixing up with some.
He'd get a kick out of
rock star guy.
Sammy Haggard.
Hagar, Ben Haggard.
Yeah. Anyway, I've come to think a little bit differently about buildings. It has, and I think to the point of what am I trying to change or affect change in, really, I think it boils down to minds, human minds, and human relationships particularly. And I think that there's a whole area of theoretical philosophy about who are we, what are we doing, that sort of is sort of foundational to recognizing that we can be different. How do we navigate that change? A lot of it, it's tied up in our educational system. Like, how do you begin to teach people about this? Well, what we're doing here is actually part of that, right? So it's more like Bucky Fuller, I think many years ago, said something like, just build a better system. I'm not so interested in changing what's there. I'm more interested in sort of creating something new. Now, creating something new is like, you never start from nothing. I mean, we're not in a vacuum. It's really kind of just thinking differently about what we've got, where we're at, and where we want to get to from here. Okay, what do you do with the architecture we have? And that starts up here. Right.
My dad was an architect, and he would take me out in the desert, and a big Buckminster Fully fan. So he would take me to look at the geodesic domes, and we talked a lot about architecture being something that restructures the way people live. To him, it was not about buildings. It was about restructuring the way we live, and the building changes the way people interact. So I think I'm still doing that work.
Yeah, so it is really about relationships. I think changing our relationships with what we think of in our culture as the material world. Now other cultures, so that I think in itself is sort of interesting. So changing our relationships with other cultures that think differently about what we call the material world is sort of a step on that path. So from an architectural perspective, what does that mean? Well, I don't know, doing things like this, where we're actually talking with other people from other cultures and having intelligent conversations and changing our own minds. It starts with me actually, changing my own mind and then working with other people to change theirs, and then come out stronger, better, faster, cheaper, whatever it is you want.
Systems change. Like
systems change, right?
Yeah.
And starting with, what are those core systems we want to change? Well, diet is one, and that's something I have actually, I've done. And so having conversations about diet, what does it have to do with architecture? A lot more than you might think.
Let's do you, Ken.
Wow, this is so rich. Thank you. And David, nice to meet you finally after all these years of following you on Twitter and Facebook. So I have spent a lot of thought and time on this, and I am in the field and systems of collaboration. I spent 10 years of my life developing the World Cafe process as one of the core founders of that process. I'm really interested in how people collaborate, getting all the voices in the room. There's so many marginalized voices which have great intelligence for the system that do not get included. So I'm really about how do we change our conversations. And I couldn't help but notice when you said nature doesn't solve problems. I have a whole thing about working with wicked messes that begins with shifting our focus from problem to participation. So I just feel like I'm right at home here. And so how can we're faced with so many challenges that outstrip our current ability. It's going to require that people from really diverse places and fields collaborate together. So I'm interested in and working on developing simple tools that are transportable and allow anybody anywhere to improve their ability to collaborate around really big challenges, messy things.
Well, that's cool. And I love the World Cafe stuff. That's great. And we'll go into the next one, the next breakout. Let's see, what value does that field or system aim to provide? So if your field or system was working the way that it should, what value is it trying to provide? Should we do a breakout for this, Chris?
Probably. It'd be fun.
All right.
Do you guys think 5 minutes is enough, or do you guys feel like you've been needing more time? All right, off you go. See you in 5.
What value does your field or system aim to provide? Who would like to start?
Well, I can start. The value I'm attempting to provide in improving collaboration is connecting feedback loops that are currently disconnected. So Meg Wheatley is on record as saying, systemic intelligence emerges as people connect to each other. And when you connect disconnected parts of the system begins to respond differently. You don't have to worry about fixing things. You just have to look at what is missing here and how do we get it connected up so the system has that missing intelligence. So I'm attempting to add value of greater systemic intelligence.
Okay, well, I like that. Can I call on you, Allison? We'll tease your answers out here.
Of course. So I talked about how the value of the system, if it were, let's say, functioning the way that, let's say optimally, would be that people would know what it meant to outgrow themselves every day on the level of our humanity. So we talked about at the beginning what makes us a bit different than all other animals. And so growing on that level, as opposed to the information level, which is where our education and typically where we tend to sit and understand growth. And in doing so, we get closer to achieving our full potential as humans. And when that happens, I don't know, because I don't think any of us have even come close to what that actually looks like. So,
Allison, it's almost like a self-actualization parallels systems actualization. That if every player in a system, I mean, in this case, you're working within a human sphere, is operating to their fullest potential, or at least sort of striving toward it, because it's always sort of evolutionary, that the system becomes richer, stronger, healthier, right? So self-actualization equals systems actualization. It's like if you think about like all the play, like if you just think about like a patch, right, of forest, what if every single one of them was stunted?
This is exactly the analogy I use. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But the opposite, I always say, if you look outside, everything is living to its fullest potential. You don't see a redwood tree that looks around and says, I don't know, my dad really liked blueberries, so I think I'm just going to do a blueberry bush. Right? It's just, but like human, we do that all the time. We have, and without awareness. So if we're aware of our behavioral patterns and we're able to make choices in full awareness in service of our purpose and achieve our potential, then we naturally harmonize with nature, because that's what nature does.
And you can't live out your potential if you aren't even aware of what that is.
Exactly.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're about kind of like human like self-actualization.
Yes. Thank you
That's what it
for
sounds
making
like.
it sound so simple.
No,
I
it's
feel like
not.
I don't have words for a lot of this
No,
yet.
I
It's
know.
kind of
It's not simple. I mean, and that's part of what I do is I'll just sort of help mine certain things. Anyway, cool.
Thank
That's
you.
great. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you, Allison. Okay, what about you, Randy?
So sticking kind of with the theme of architecture, one of the common tropes is that we are concerned with human health, safety, or public health, safety, and welfare. It's sort of an interesting way of thinking about things that, okay, it sort of constrains to some certain public. So which public? The value, I think, is not health, safety, or welfare, but a framework in which health, safety, and welfare can be achieved through the discretion of the actors in that scenario. And, as an architect, I can't tell people what to do. I can create a space for you to do it in, and the choices you make, you're creating your own health.
Right.
I'm not doing it.
I like what you're
Create
saying
that
about
frame.
architecture providing restraints as well as facilitation, but it's facilitating patterns, right, of interaction or restraining them.
Yeah, and this happens, I think, at different levels. A lot of times we think about it as the individual or family or community level. Probably goes beyond that.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about architecture as like an emergent facilitator. Yeah. What about you, Harry?
Along the same lines, is that's why I stopped, because of the options that the educational system trained me in. Certainly, I had my own creative process, but the models that I was given and that I was continuing to adapt to don't seem to work right now. And so the value principle here is actually there's a particular piece of property that we own right now that I handed over to brokers, and they're just marketing it as another property to build another condo on. And that doesn't speak to the perspective I'm in right now. And finally, I said, well, what does the land want it to be? How do I interact with that piece of property? And actually had a conversation on another Zoom call with Jamie Miller on a very similar issue. What am I going to create? What value can I create? The interactions that I would have with the client. Who is the client? What is this process about, and how does it actually relate to? So the value proposition is how much of nature can influence the outcome of what this piece of building or environment will be.
I'm picking up there that the value of the architecture field is to allow land and places to be what they are. So it's an interesting perspective on that. Let me move to David, if you can, David.
Okay, sorry, I'm taking care of my grandson.
I love that.
So the quote unquote system that I'm most familiar with is the social entrepreneurship system. But the social entrepreneurship system doesn't actually talk about the social entrepreneurship system. Each of the social enterprises talk about the system they think they're in. And about 6-7 years ago, almost simultaneously, all of the supportive networks for social entrepreneurship all started talking about systems change. And they all went out and did their case studies and their briefs and their conference presentations and their panels. And I think, just looking at it simply, what you find is they reverse engineered a story out of their successes. There were relatively few successes to reverse engineer a story from. And the conclusion was that these brilliant people have figured out how to change the system, and the rest of you must be doing something wrong. And they didn't actually say that, but that's the inference from the fact that most of them use the same 10 success stories in one form or another.
Yeah, it sounds like biomimicry.
Right, and of course they're in a system where they're actually only familiar with about 20% of the social entrepreneurs, and so the reason they're using the same 10 is because those 10 are really good at marketing their success within the 20% that they know about. The problem is every one of those social enterprises is in a much larger, much more ingrained, much more real, much more resourced system, which they're trying to work against. And the other system that's there is the people who don't like that current system and they want more for themselves. And they're trying to change the current system to help them. And so the guys who are trying to make things better are fighting against those other two larger, more resource systems. And that's why Bucky Fuller's recommendation always fails. Because when you build that new thing, it has to fight those other two groups. And they have more resources and they're more entrenched and they have the profit motive and they have the associated good feelings that people get from buying whatever it is they buy that creates the profit. So I guess my answer to your question is you have to look at those three different systems and what they're trying to accomplish. And if you go back to those success stories, you'll find out that they figured out some tricky way to make the other two systems cooperate.
Interesting. Oh, so reconciliation right there. All right. So here's a question, and we can just talk about this right now, but what do you think is preventing your field or system from providing that value? And a lot of you touched on that already. But just think about that for yourself for a few minutes and do some journaling on that. So what do you think is preventing the field or system from providing that value that it could? We'll just start with this. I was getting a little ahead of myself. So what do you think is preventing your field or system from providing that value? And I'll give you a few minutes to think about it, and then we'll just popcorn on that. And then we'll move into the next stage. Okay. So what do you think is preventing your field or system from achieving its full value potential? And there's probably quite a few, but you can list off a few. We would like, oh, Allison, go ahead.
This one I think I can say succinctly, if I could say that word, that our behavioral patterns. So most of us, all of us, myself included, are mostly on autopilot. And that autopilot has us repeating behavioral patterns from generation to generation. And because of that, things don't substantively change. The lack of awareness.
So I suspect you're going to go to work on that.
Yeah. Yes, well, that's what it is, right? Being aware of yourself and and connecting with your intuition.
Evoking consciousness.
There you go. Evoking consciousness.
Oh, being aware of what consciousness is. So this is
It's being conscious of consciousness.
Yeah, basically. This is something I worked on for a long time. So my background's in neuroscience and I've studied behavior and consciousness. I helped write a book on consciousness. So I feel like this is something I spent a lot of time with, right? And it is really astonishing when you start to look at yourself, for myself anyway, how much of the gestures, the intonation, even the words I'm saying now, they've been said before. They're not created in the space, in the moment. So working with people to get to that space.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Would someone else like to contribute? I see, David, you've got your what's
Yeah.
preventing. Yes.
I
this is
wrote
good.
mine down in the chat.
I like it. Okay. So he's
Yeah.
got 3 things preventing it. The profit motive won't work, the underutilized resources, and the org aggregation doesn't work. So, okay. And so are you going to work on all 3 of those?
Well, it kind of depends on, what the particular specific is, but I mean, there's lots of people working on all 3 of them in different ways, but I guess the first place to start is to say, can I find a problem where the profit motive works? I can access the underutilized resources, and either aggregating the organizations trying to do this could work, or some other way of networking them could work. So if you can find that, then theoretically you can make some progress. And then for the situations where you can't, then you have to come up with some alternative. But I mean, so an example of this, of a social entrepreneur that none of the people in the social entrepreneur system know about, is the largest dairy cooperative in India, named Amul. And Amul is a great example where the profit motive would work. You could hire a set of professional managers and you could task them to do the professional management stuff without giving them the ownership of the network. The network could stay owned by the farmers. And then you could access the underutilized resources, which is all the farmers cooperating. And then you could aggregate the different distribution and retail and other organizations in a way that that whole system would work. And that results in 85% of the income going to the farmers.
Wow.
Whereas normally it would be 25% to 30%. So that's an example where all those things could work.
Yeah.
It's the exception rather than the rule, unfortunately.
Yeah, and a perfect example of changing the relationships provides a different value.
There has to be a binder too, right? They all have to.
They have to be connected.
Right. There has to be something.
Yeah. The profit motive is a good start as a binder.
Right. It's a sort of like really shared core value that they actually have to really give a shit about.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have some will to really pursue that in an ongoing way. Otherwise, it's like anything else. If you don't really care about it, eventually you will peter out and just kind of do whatever opens up next, and you won't fight for it.
Yeah, I mean, just take the nonprofit world. Number one, the profit motive doesn't work. It's assumed to not work.
Right.
Number two, the underutilized resources are accessed by means that have to keep the underutilized resources happy. and that's backwards. So that doesn't work very well. And then you at least somewhere between 10 and 100x the number of organizations that have to be aggregated. So 10 or up to 100 more times, not 10, 100 organizations, 10 times as many organizations have to be aggregated, because the first 2 things mean you've got thousands of small and medium-sized organizations and virtually no big ones.
Right.
So
they're all in competition. They're all competing for these little scraps.
It's worse than that.
Trying to do the exact same thing.
They're in competition secretly.
That's right.
They won't even admit they're in competition.
That's right. That's right. That's right. And they're all trying to do the exact same thing. It's like it's a monocrop, really. Like they're all trying to pull from the same resources at the exact same plane, right? Instead of doing different things or different offerings or pulling from different parts of the strata, so to speak. They're all monocrop. It's a monocrop. And it does exactly what it does in a monocrop.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. Ken, did you want to? I see you're writing about. You have a whole list of things that.
Yeah, these are all. these are all things that I've actually gotten from clients. Like when I outline the 4 conversations that I included in collaborative conversations, I'm told we don't have time for that. And so my question is always, well, how often do you have to do things over? And they're like, well, pretty often. Well, if you went slower at the start and included these conversations and that meant you didn't have to do things over, would that make it worthwhile for you? And I've had clients say to me, we really need emotional intelligence here, but we don't want anything touchy-feely. So, there's this schizophrenic approach of we really want to change, but we really don't want to change. And this is a big thing in organizations trying to overcome. They're constantly after change, but anything that threatens where they actually have to really go deep in and start to go, all right, well, let's look at, I'll ask a client, how do you handle conflict? Well, we don't. How's it working out for you? Not very well. What are you doing about it? Nothing. Do you want to do something about it? Not really. So, we say we do, but we really don't. And yeah,
they don't want to argue
because,
with you about that, Ken.
Yeah, because in an organizational setting, there's a lot of therapy needed in organizational settings, but it's not okay to do therapeutic work there. So you have to come in through the side door. You have to do something that looks like it's really about business, that's actually connecting people to their emotions and to each other in such a way that they recognize, there is a better way to work here. And it's, when I get work, when I have clients, when I get to go in and work with them, they're always happy, but it's really hard to get in the door. So it's one of those push-pull things. Like once you're there and you start doing the work, oh, this is fantastic, but getting in there, like, we really don't want to do that.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, like everything we do is all built on efficiency. It's, can we scale it up? And so how do you scale up? It's remove all the variation and, and so then we're saying, oh, but we need diversity. We need all these things. But we actually have already set the container to reward efficiency. So we actually don't want diversity and all those things because those are noise to suppress so we can scale up. So how do we do both?
Interesting you mentioned diversity. I just did a 6-month program for a global financial services firm on diversity, where I took almost 1,000 people. I was part of a team that took 14,000 people through this 90-minute session. And I have to say I was very changed by this because I spoke to 973 people, 372 of them were women, almost 400 were from outside the US, almost 400 were people of color. And witnessing and listening to their stories of how they have systemically been excluded really had a profound impact on me. And the challenge is the company, I think, now says we can tick the box on diversity and inclusion. And instead, what they really have to do is recognize we open the conversation. If we don't come in with something soon to carry it forward, people are going to be really pissed off, feeling like you made us vulnerable, you got us to share these things, and you have no follow-up because there's nothing that I can see coming down the line of how are we going to do this. And I submitted a 12-page, here's my assessment of what you have for openings, opportunities here, things you could have done better, things you did really well. And I never heard anything back from them. So it's just like disappears into that HR vacuum of, well, but we already did that. We don't have time to go back.
And then, you wonder why people are disengaged and leaving.
And the last thing I want to say about learning is that if you don't take the time, here's one area where the United States Army is one of the premier learning organizations in the world because they go over everything. What did we learn? We had a battle plan. It didn't work because it never does. So what do we learn from that? And most organizations don't take the time to say, hey, we just did something great. How did that work? What can we learn from that? Because they're too busy going on the next thing. So it is being able to slow down and say, if we can take the time to actually celebrate what people did, figure out what we can replicate that worked well, figure out what we need to dampen that didn't work so well, and tweak and introduce new things, then you'd keep doing the same thing over and over. And you keep getting the same results.
Yeah. And here we are.
And look at the world, it's not working so great.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you. All right. So what I was hoping that you would do is get to the point where you're clear on what is the restraint on your system that you want to go to work on, yourself. And so I you're all pretty established people in your field, so you're pretty clear on this. But I think you've probably honed a little bit more into what you think are the key points that are restraining that field. And so, you know, what are you uniquely working on in there? And so we've talked a little bit about that and what value that might bring to the field. So if the changes that you are making, the value that those might bring to the field. So I'm just going to ask then, what is your unique aspiration? What are you uniquely going to work on? And I would like you to put it into this kind of format. So you're going to write a purpose statement. And so you're going to, what do you do? And how do you do it? And why do you do it? So you're going to my purpose is to share living systems thinking in a way that is uniquely sourced from the living world and takes into account my values and my approach so that I can change the way that people relate and live. And so so if each of you wants to write this, and now in a way that is getting at your values and your unique process, your unique special sauce. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to write about that, and then we can finesse them a little bit, refine them a little bit. So do we want to go through it, or do you want to actually? Why don't you each write your purpose statement in the chat? Yeah, write them in the chat, and then what I'm going to do is put you in breakouts, and you can share your purpose statements with each other for 10 minutes, Chris? And we'll pop in and we'll help you refine that. Yeah.
Sure. All right. Be prepared to be beamed out.
Okay. I hope that was useful. I'm going to come back around to this. So what you've just done is sort of put what you do into this biological format. So as an evolutionary biologist, I have become aware of these, you know, 4 kind of pillars that remain the same in different species. So each species has its own nature, it has its own context, environment, and it has its own role. And that's a symbiotic role, exchanges that it makes. And those 3 things necessitate these adaptive transformations. So designing for potential takes all these into account, and in a nested system way. So I'm going to show you this general pattern for organisms, and then we're going to look at the potential for superorganisms like us, and then we're going to go back to your statement. So this is kind of a general pattern that I've observed for all species. So they have a nature, they have an essential nature, and they have a role. So they have different relationships with other species that they're making exchanges. They have a niche, something they rely on, their source nutrients, and they have a variety of ways of surviving and developing and reproducing that allow them to get those things. So that's a general pattern, and what happens is they collect those things that they depend on in their niche, and that has to be fed by their role. So even though these patterns are very complex and they go through a lot of different species, the role and the niche have to feed one another ultimately. So here's what we see for superorganisms. It's a similar kind of pattern, but because they have all these individuals and they're all genetically distinct, even though they share a purpose, so it's really the colony becomes the organism. And so what they do, it's a generalized pattern that all the superorganisms have, is they go out into the environment and they collect these small specks of resources. So like honeybees are collecting pollen, and ants are collecting seeds or, you know, different things. The mycelial fungus is collecting these little particles of nutrients and water in the soil. And what they do is they bring it together, they gather it, and they partner with other organisms to upcycle it in value with symbiosis. This is just a general pattern. So, and then they use this collective intelligence, which is diverse and independent individuals, joining together what they know, their intelligence, so that they can have more eyes and ears on the ground. And then this swarm creativity is that everybody has their own job, and all these roles are necessary for the functioning of the whole superorganism. So it's a similar pattern to organisms, but it's a little bit more complex. It has its own dynamics. So, but basically, superorganisms like us are self-organizing around shared purpose. So they share a purpose. If the queen cannot reproduce, nobody reproduces. That's it for them. So, but what happens in these superorganisms is that by coming together with all their diverse roles and their collective intelligence and their swarm creativity, they have these new capabilities. So like slime molds, they produce, usually they're going through the soil by themselves looking for food. But when things get scarce, they set out this chemical signal that they all come together and they form this slug. And now they can do things they couldn't do before. So now they can move around as a group. They can, sporulate, all these things. And that's the same with us. Here's these honeybees. So here is the pattern that we see with the superorganism. These are these termite mounds in Botswana, and these are like 30 feet tall. So what they do is little termites go out at night and they collect all these little scraps of grass and things that are really not worthwhile to other species. It wouldn't be economical for them to gather this stuff. So what they do, they go and gather that, they pull it down into their nests, they chew it up, and they feed these fungal gardens down there. So they're partnering with another organism to upcycle these particles. And in the process of doing that, the fungus can break down these fibers that animals can't do. And they feed them to the fungus and they eat the fungal fruits. And in the process, the soil gets richer, and that increases the grasses, that draws herbivores. Their droppings enrich the soil. They bring carnivores. The carcasses enrich the soil, and the habitat gets richer and richer and richer. So that is the role that superorganisms play in the environment. And we are superorganisms. We share this pattern. So it really relies on helping and sharing and bounded commons of trusted relationships. So our territories are patches. And by doing that, we evolve these extended sets of capabilities and resources we can share with each other. So it gives us a kind of an insurance policy. So when we're going back to that question of what makes us special, what makes us unique, we really are superorganism species. But if you look at these other superorganisms, some of these pictures are ants and termites, and some of them are us. And the pattern is remarkably similar, right? It has this kind of signature of intelligent design. And that's a superorganism feature. But then if you look, here's these leafcutter ants, 0 hours stopped in traffic, whereas we're spending 70 million hours in the Netherlands alone last year. So what is it we're doing that is not in keeping with our superorganism nature? What can we do better? So I looked at this as an evolutionary biologist and found these 5 patterns that superorganisms use to grow, these capabilities and to really create these thriving habitats. And so this is an interesting pattern that I observed. So here we have this general superorganism pattern, but this is actually, when occasionally these parasites come in and take over a colony. So like a queen will make a queen of another species will make a pheromone that smells exactly like the larva of the host colony. So the workers go out and they come across this parasite and they go, oh, it smells like one of my larvae. I better take it down into the nest. So they do that. And then of course the parasite wakes up and eats all the young. And so what happens then is that they use the host labor to do all their bidding. And then all the particulate raw resources just gets fed right back to the parasite. But then you can see that waste is no longer being upcycled. So you get this accumulating waste. And then eventually the particulate resources disappear. We don't need collective intelligence anymore because we're just doing the parasite's bidding. So what are the implications of that? And to me, this pattern looks really familiar to our lives. And so, that's really what we're going to be talking about in these meetings. It's like, how can we look at these patterns and interfere in them to change systems? We can look at it as a superorganism, and this in a way that becomes those 5 teaming principles. How can we do it in a way that increases collective intelligence, or that increases swarm creativity, or our distributed leadership that we use to maintain our cultures, the regeneration of the resources that we depend on. So in the future workshops that we do, we're going to be doing these monthly. We'll be working on those patterns to see how, in a way, that the way that we do our work can become more in alignment with the ways that that humans work, to rehumanize our way of life. So let's see what you got here for this purpose.
I have a question before we go there. Can you go to the slide with the 3 circles on the pentagram? Yeah, that. What are the 3 circles there?
Okay, so your nature, that's you, or your organization. This is the work you do, or the work that you do as an individual, or your organization. And then this is the larger context you work in. So these are the exchanges that you're making with other organisms outside your system.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another way to look at it, or just to simplify it, is like the first ring is that like essential identity, if it's yourself or a business. The second loop is about sort of internal capacities, or within the organization, it's the working together, the internal capacities that have to function and be developed so that they can continuously purvey their value to the larger system, which is that third ring. The third ring is the greater context, the sort of bounded system that it's trying to work on and upgrade. Yeah. That it gets its resources from, and so on and so forth.
Thank you.
A fun way to play with it, I mean, and again, Tamsin said that, we're going to be working more on this in future things, is to take any one of those dyads, the relationship between parts, and ask yourself, what would happen if that was severed or compromised in some way? Right. So it's interesting. It's like, oh, well, what's the implication on swarm creativity if the company has no collective intelligence? And what implication does that have on the resources that it pulls from? Like how efficiently is it actually going to pull from that? And will they actually work in a way that actually really upcycles these things, or is it going to create more waste? And what if it had no coherent identity, right? What if everybody's just trying to find a job and they just do what they do and they actually have no bounded sense of identity? So it's just fun. It's always the relationship between things that where the juice in this actually comes in, is when you start playing with the dyads and their implication on each other.
So I would just ask, and I know we're out of time, if you have some actual examples of human-led efforts that have used your model as you describe it here to scale, I'd love to hear about them.
Okay.
And it would be useful to see at least 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Now, rather than going down the path.
Right.
I mean, the cynic in me says that the parasite is humanity.
The cynic in me says that too, but not all humanity, right? I mean, most of us are
85 to 90% of the system's investment.
Yeah,
I think it's our inhumanity that's the parasite, not our humanity.
Yeah,
I would say that
I'm using humanity as a description of all the humans, not with its other definition. I'll say that you use humanity, and I'll say all the humans are the parasites.
I would say
aggregate behavior.
I would say if you looked at this is a model for how old traditional tribal cultures.
Yeah,
and that's a bit of a carte blanche statement, but you could look at this and go, this is pretty much it. They had a very bounded sense of identity. They were very clear about the boundaries of their context. They knew that they had to do things in a way that continuously sort of upcycled what they did, or at least didn't compromise it. That had a collective intelligence. They knew exactly who they were, and they knew how to do everything in that system. Everybody from the smallest kid.
You have a lot more confidence in them than I do.
Well, I look at several million years of history up until the last, maybe 10,000 as a model, and it's a blip that we're seeing here. Become really big.
Those millions of years of history include 0 examples of scale.
Well, why do they need
observation?
Remember,
I could jump in here.
Remember, I said, can you give me a human-led example operating at scale? Mm-hmm. That's my request. The indigenous things are wonderful, but none of them scaled.
Well, maybe that's an interesting question, because does nature scale? Maybe we're going about that the wrong way.
Human scale.
Yes.
That's the very nature of the parasitic.
Right, I agree. But if you think like what Chris is saying about these, like tribal groups, having these full systems, they don't scale. They live in small groups, and so maybe that is.
And the world has gone from 2 to 7 billion people, despite the existence of indigenous models.
Well, this is the paradox that we have to live with.
What we're looking at here actually reflects our current state, except. So look at particulate resources, right? Our culture is built on taking all these resources, pulling them together, and so far it's worked. It's worked swimmingly well, but we've crossed a boundary. The particulate resources are so far stretched that the transformation of those has changed that big circle.
Mm-hmm.
And the symptom,
I believe you're
of
agreeing
that,
with me.
The symptom of that is the ocean is heating up, because when the particulate resources were functioning in that larger system, it kept that temperature in check. I won't explain the physics, but for a long time it worked. Mm-hmm. It doesn't work anymore. We have exceeded the scale, and that is the problem.
Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, if you look at it,
that's all I'm asking for is a couple of examples.
Yeah.
I'll have to think about them, but
well, I think that this is it's like the problem is the solution too. So if this is true, and this is a pattern that even millions of years ago was true, and it's no longer true, what would it look like to change the way that we do things in a way that brings this back? Right. It's not, I don't think it's a problem of scale. I think it's the processes in which we do them that compromises those aggregates and compromises the systems. It doesn't have to.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, one thing I think about right away is that what's the difference between, a tribal society and, a lot of the organizations today is where do we get our particular resources from? Some other place that's not in our system. So we're really not even thinking about systems. I mean, we suffer the consequences of it because it is a system, but it's a broken one. But so then I wonder, okay, here's my human example for you, like interface carpet. What they ended up doing was collecting the fishing nets that had been discarded in the Philippines, and having villagers, they were paying them to collect their fishing nets.
I've heard the interface story presented in person multiple times.
Okay, and so, but my point with that is that what they did was they took the resources in their system and they expanded their system to include it, so that the fishing village became part of the system that they were optimizing, instead of getting it from, some random supplier. they brought, so by feeding the thing that feeds them, they were able to restore this kind of superorganism, even though it doesn't look like traditional tribal groups because it's global. So there are models, I think, but it's we don't think about the resources and the upcycling as part of our systems generally. Most organizations are not.
I think you can probably guess what my response would be to interface. Interface is part of an industry. If you look at the industry as a whole and you map out its particulate resource usage, you'll find that interface impacted the day that industry overuses its share of the resources by 2 days, 3 days. So we used to run out of, they used to use all of their resources by September 11th, and now they use all the resources by September 14th. That's
for
the
interface
impact.
specifically?
That's the impact of the entire interface business.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
On the at scale implementation of the carpet industry.
Right. And that doesn't surprise me. But what you see is with the company itself is done spectacularly, and the employees, it's changed their engagement. It brings forth more.
All good things from interface and its employees.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's the systemic answer to everything, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that, when we start connecting these 5 patterns, we can actually start to, evolve our superorganisms. I'm not a big scale believer, but that is the struggle, I think, of our times, because any model is going to have to be scalable or people aren't going to go for it in this efficiency model that we're in.
I have a question about scale, because it feels like, or David, it's a question towards you about what is the assumption behind what it means to scale, because you could imagine something scaling where it's reproducible across all places, or you could imagine something scaling where it's done in its own way, multiple places. So is the scale the latter or the former that you're looking at, or that you're interested in?
So scale is a very confusing word, and I'm not sure I can even get us 10% of the way towards solving its confusion. 99% of the people in the world use scale as a synonym for rapid growth.
Okay. Right. Okay.
So when I say at scale to those people, they say, well, you're just talking about growing. We're just going to go grow. That's what we do. We're entrepreneurs. We grow things. That's our nature. That's the essence. The other way, the definition of scale is at the level that solves the problem. And that definition of scale means that if the carpet industry is using 1.4 its available share of the resources, and you have a solution at scale, then that means you're able to deliver the carpets to the people who want them using 1.0 of your share of the resources.
Yeah, we haven't done that.
Yeah, and any system that doesn't do that is not operating at the level that solves the problem, and therefore is not operating at scale. And the problem is that the human parasite has a whole bunch of things that it just automatically scales without any regard for anybody else on the planet. And, I mean, the best example of that right now is India's population, and Africa is going to follow suit. Absolutely. There's nothing we can do about it. The only thing we can do is change the birth rate in Africa from 4.7 to 3.5 or something like that on average. The 3.5 is still going to take us from 7 billion to 10 billion. And there's nothing we can do about it. So that's the issue. That's the fundamental issue.
It's really helpful. Thank you for that, to understand what it is that you mean by scale. And I think you point out something that is so misunderstood is that we have this desire to grow as humans. And I think that because we're so misaligned with who we are, we put that growth towards these systems that then require these outsized resources. And so I quite like the explanation you gave of to scale within an industry, because that really is closer in alignment with what it means to grow within your own nature. Looking just again outside and at the window of things that in nature, all of those things are growing, but they're growing in a way that's at scale the way you're talking about it, right? And I think because, like I said, because we're so disconnected, we just think, well, more money, more power, more influence, more whatever it is, more covering of the globe with our thing. And that's considered, that's because we're so disconnected, that's trying to satisfy that growth within us that just, it doesn't work, which is why we keep growing and growing and growing in this other way, in a cancerous parasitic way. So thank you for that explanation. It's really helpful.
I'd like to add the factor that we speak about. If you're going by industry verticals, there's a common pain point across a particular industry. So if the entire industry was involved in just one aspect of how we could benefit from the swarm activity and the collective intelligence that it takes with solutions that could bring some item down, that would make a big change too. Because if you now multiply that across all industries, we've collectively taken a huge portion of stuff down in terms of the impact that it's having on the planet. So we could address scale from that perspective as well.
I'm just noticing the time. We have gone over, so let me just wrap this up real quick. And if you want to go continue talking, we can. So I was just going to say I'm doing these workshops monthly, at least monthly. And each one's different. These are 6 series that are part of this Your Teaming Transformation, which is around the book. And I think it's pretty novel. And then we're going to do a course in June, which will include all these. So I love your feedback on any of this, if you're willing to give it, and anything I can do better. And then I'm doing the one-on-one consulting at the Team Lab. So you can just go to teamlab.com if you're interested in any of that. And then the last thing is I'm excited about, I just am starting to do these Rehumanize Immersion experiences. So some of them are in Borrego Springs at our ranch, but a lot of them we can do it virtually. So, and then this first one, April 23rd, is going to be virtual. So it is kind of rehumanizing minds is the way approach I'm going about it. So art and evolutionary thinking, and then storytelling, because that's uniquely human. So this is going to be something a little different. I'm doing it with families and teams and individuals, and it's going to be a creative process. It's not going to be like anything I have normally done. That just so you can see what the Borrego Springs Ranch looks like. It's amazing, 900 acres of wilderness, like deep wilderness in Borrego Springs. And that's it. Thank you. So let's just, I'm just going to open it to conversation if you want to have any Q&A. And other than that, I will send you a recording and the deck. And feel free to email me, Dr. Tamsin at drtamsin.com, and ask me any questions.
Thank you very much. I've actually got to go take care of my grand. Oops. Thank you very much. I've got to go take care of my grandson.
David.
But if you do have some examples, I'd love to.
I will. I'll send you some. I'm going to think about that.
Okay.
That's a great question.
Excellent. Great to meet everyone. Ken, great to meet you after all these years. You don't know how many times you've made me laugh.
Right.
Over the years. So I thank you for. I cumulatively thank you for each one.
Pun Master Ken.
Isn't fair on my part, but good to meet everyone. Thank you.
You too.
Likewise.
Thank you, David.
Bye.
All right. So you're welcome to go if you like. Don't feel like you have to keep your face for me. But yeah, anything you want to say to wrap up?
He is crazy. Convinced me.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, so this is all pretty interesting and exciting. Just sort of curious if maybe you could just do a quick update on where where all these different activities are at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've got Geoversity, Borrego Institute, and then I have the book. So the book is coming along fast, and then that's going to come out. I'm hoping it'll come out in July, but I'm going to do a course on it, so we can like play with these things and see how they actually work in real life. So there's that. And then Geoversity, we're doing these immersions. We're going to do GeoSchool starting in September. So if you know anybody like gap year students or anything like that. And then we're moving more into these these experiential education immersions. Should be interesting. And then the Borrego Institute, we've got the creative residencies where you can come and write a book or learn a new skill or explore naturalism. I'll be there a lot, so I'm kind of like a free mentor there. And then most importantly, we're going to be doing these monthly workshops while I'm developing the course and the book.
Okay.
So yeah, I would love it if you share these and feel free to let me know what works and what doesn't. Any ideas you have.
Do you have like a calendar or?
I do. It's on teamlab.com events. And there's also offerings, which it details all the different modules, the different workshops.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Have a great weekend. And I really appreciate your time. It's just so nice to see you guys. Yeah. Thank you.